All right, let's get right into it. Over in Assam, India, a court has just handed down its verdict on a truly horrific crime that happened almost 8 years ago. This is a story about how a rumor on social media spiraled into a deadly mob lynching and the incredibly long and difficult search for justice that came after. So here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with the verdicts that just came in, then we're going to travel back to that terrible day in 2018 to really understand what went down. We'll look at the social media rumor that sparked the whole thing, unpack the court's pretty complex judgment, and then finally, we'll see what happens next in what really is an unfinished quest for justice. We're actually going to start this story at the end, or at least what seems like the end. After nearly 8 long years, a verdict has finally been delivered by the District and Sessions Court in Nagaon, Assam. And this really is the fundamental question of this entire heartbreaking situation. How does something so intangible, a baseless rumor on a screen, turn into such brutal, real-world, and ultimately fatal violence? The details of this case? Well, they offer a pretty chilling answer. The verdict itself, it tells a really complicated story. I mean, look at this. On one hand, you have 20 individuals who were convicted for their part in the crime. But on the other, a larger group, 25 people, were acquitted because there just wasn't enough evidence. This split decision is so key to understanding why, for so many people, this doesn't feel like complete justice. Just let that number sink in for a second. 8 years. That is an absolutely agonizing wait. 8 years of grief and uncertainty for the victims' families and for the whole community. So to really understand the gravity of this verdict, we have to go back. We need to go back to 2018 and remember the 2 people who are at the very center of this tragedy. The victims were Abhijit Nath and Nilopal Das. They were 2 friends from Guwahati, and they were in the Karbi Anglong district for a reason. They were there to study the Kingshalungshu waterfalls for an environmental project. So here's how this absolute nightmare unfolded. What began as a peaceful field trip ended right here, at a place called Panjuri Kachari Gantanali. They were ambushed by a massive mob. We're talking 150 to 200 people. And even though they told the crowd who they were and pleaded for their lives, the assault didn't stop. Then, in a really grim twist, the very thing that spread the rumor in the first place, social media, was used to post videos of the attack, which, as you can imagine, sparked outrage all across the state. So you have to ask yourself, why? What could possibly drive a crowd of nearly 200 people to commit such a horrific act? The answer wasn't something they saw with their own eyes. The catalyst was digital. The prosecution's case was built around this. A dangerous rumor about child lifters had been spreading like wildfire on social media. And in a tragic, fatal case of mistaken identity, the paranoid crowd targeted Abhijit and Nilopal, convinced they were the villains from this online fiction. Let's be perfectly clear here. This violence wasn't a reaction to a real crime. It was a reaction to a lie. The mob was acting on pure suspicion, fueled entirely by a rumor they saw on their phones, with absolutely zero evidence to back it up. So how did the court even begin to untangle this? Let's break down Judge D. Mahanta's verdict for the 45 people who actually stood trial. Okay, so this table really lays it out. 20 people were found guilty of murder. Now, the key legal idea here is something called common object. Basically, what the law says is if you are part of a mob that shares a criminal goal, you're liable for what the group does, even if you weren't the person who struck the fatal blow. But for those 25 who were acquitted, well, the court decided there just wasn't enough evidence to prove they were part of that common object, that shared intent. And as you can probably imagine, this verdict isn't the final word, not by a long shot. For the families of Abhijit and Nilopal, this just marks the start of a new and maybe even more complicated chapter in their long fight for justice. This quote just gets right to the heart of it. They're dissatisfied. I mean, while 20 people were convicted, the fact that 25 others were acquitted has left the families feeling like justice hasn't really been served. You can hear the question in their voices. How could so many people just walk free? So this legal battle is definitely not over. The next step is the sentencing for those 20 convicted individuals, which is set for April 24th. And after that, the victims' families have said they may challenge the acquittals by taking their case to a higher court. And that's what this all boils down to, right? It leaves us all with this incredibly difficult, lingering question. This whole case just shines a light on the immense challenge of finding individual responsibility in the absolute chaos of a mob. When a rumor can turn a crowd into a weapon, how was true justice ever really served? It's a question this verdict only partly answers, leaving the rest, well, unresolved.